attendees are in listen-only mode.
So thanks everyone for joining us for another Learning Lunch session hosted by Format Approved. We are the industry leader in online healthcare technology, regulatory, and compliance education, and thus we have launched and continue on with our goal of providing educational opportunities for our audience week to week with our Format Approved Learning Lunch series. My name is Wendy Whitmore. I'm the Information Officer for Format Approved, filling in today for Brian Johnson, our Director of Training and Education, who is generally our moderator. And today's Learning Lunch title is Understanding SNOMED CT, the clinical terminology required for meaningful use. And our speaker today and I were just having a quick pre-session chat about the fact that people are largely and in many cases I think a little bit confused by the relationship between SNOMED and meaningful use, but also their requirements as it relates to this particular aspect of terminology. You know, the acronym SOUP and terminology tongue twisters in healthcare are a consistent sore spot for many in our webinar audience. So we've invited this extremely experienced industry expert to help us understand this particular issue, and hopefully we'll engage her in future ones as well. So I am going to just jump to a little bit of detail about our presenter today. We're joined by Debra Konicek. Debra is the Managing Director of the College of American Pathologists Consulting Division with more than 30 years of clinical healthcare and EHR implementation experience. She has authored and presented globally on topics related to healthcare standards, clinical informatics, terminology issues specific to EHR implementation. So welcome, Debra. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the hour.
Yeah, we, like I said, we have done, you know, a few sessions over the course of the last year or two that address aspects of technology, particularly as it relates to meaningful use. But this is absolutely a unique one. So to our audience, feel free to type questions into the chat area during the session. Answers to those questions will be addressed in the second half of our session if time allows, or they'll be posted to our website and sent via email link later in the week. Also, please note that all who registered for today's session will receive an email with links to both the slide deck and recorded versions of this event. And I say that, I may say that again because it is a frequent question that we get throughout the session. And I will say that of all of the slide decks and all of the presentations we've done, Debra, this by far in the deck itself is probably the most helpful information that I've seen. So thanks for that, by the way.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start by kind of addressing from a level of basic understanding, and I think for many of the audience members and certainly for the general public in healthcare, understanding what SNOMED CT is from the get-go is probably a good place to start.
Sure. I think there's a slide that starts before this.
Oh,
that just talks about the
sorry.
terminology.
Okay, yep.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit. This slide is not meant to terrify the audience. Usually when I pull this up at consulting client engagements, the room, you know, becomes pale and starts to look the other way. But it basically just gives you a high-level overview of what the requirements are for SNOMED CT and how that fits into other requirements. You can see here I've left you behind with some examples of all the terminologies that are required for meaningful use. And SNOMED CT is basically the core terminology or the underlying clinical terminology there that has relationships to all the other terminologies. And we'll talk a lot about that today. ICD-10 now being required for October of this year adds to the drama of people trying to understand what their terminology strategy is. So throughout this conversation, I'd like to highlight what SNOMED CT is, how it's different and the same to ICD-10, and then what are your responsibilities and what does it look like for you from a terminology management perspective, because this is a big job. Someone has to own it. Someone has to be in charge of it within your organization, and there are certain best practices in terms of how to do that. But I think we should start by just understanding a little bit about what SNOMED CT is. That's the most frequent question I get. Folks are pretty comfortable if they're from the lab about LOINC, and the billers and coders and the payers are all getting more and more comfortable with ICD-10. The pharma folks know RX norm. So let's go on to the next slide then, and we can start talking about SNOMED. How about that?
Sounds good. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think in general this is an area that hovers around the fringes of all of those bubbles that you were talking about a moment ago. So yeah, let's understand this a little better.
Okay, so the long formal name is the Systematized Nomenclature of Medicine Clinical Terms. I think if we were creating SNOMED today, we would probably change that word medicine to healthcare, because SNOMED addresses all of the clinical content that you need to represent the patient experience. There's nutritional content, pharma content, PT, OT, nursing medicine. There's even pastoral care content, veterinary content, that kind of thing. So it's a large terminology that's applicable for a lot of different practices. I think one of my favorite stories that I tend to tell is we do Take Your Child to Work Day at the college. In the year that I was in charge, I did a Wheel of Fortune game, and my favorite answer when I asked the kids what does SNOMED stand for was that it's the name of the clinic at the North Pole where the elves go to seek health care. So I thought that was kind of cute. But the name came from the U.S. had a terminology that the college created called SNOMED RT. The UK had a terminology called Clinical Terms Version 3. Those two large global clinical terminologies were merged in 2002 to become SNOMED CT. It was owned and maintained by the College of American Pathologists jointly with the NHS over the years. Kaiser Permanente's name is here because when we were creating this large global terminology, you can imagine trying to merge two giant terminologies with lots of content. We went to seek folks that had terminology expertise, and Kaiser had their own convergent medical terminology organization within their practice, and they had lots of subject matter experts that had deep terminology expertise. So there was several years of joint working groups to create this. In 2007, the ownership transferred from the college to the IHTSDO, which is the International Health Terminology Standards Development Organization. That's a big mouthful, but basically the point here is the college spent many years involved in terminology, starting with anatomic pathology terminology, moving on to clinical terminology, created that relationship across the seas with somebody else who had a similar type of terminology. But the college continued to, over the 5-year period, maintain and release SNOMED CT twice a year. So the ownership transferring to this consortium of countries allowed more folks to use it. So I think we can go on to the next slide and we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So I've put the website here for you for the IHTSDO, and you might want to go out there and look because it's got a lot of good information. There's newsletters there telling what all different countries are doing with SNOMED, but there's also presentations, there's SNOMED CT implementation guides, lists of browsers, that kind of thing. So you can see that there's a lot of countries that have a vested interest now in creating this global terminology. How this works is that every country joins this group via their Ministry of Health. In the United States, it's our National Library of Medicine, the NLM, that sponsors our membership. So anyone in the United States can use SNOMED CT for free. It used to be that it was a licensed product that you had to pay a licensing fee for your organization. But making this a global standards organization, making it free across the world, has now enabled us to have one global terminology that we can share across countries and across vendor platforms. Breaking news here to this slide is last week Portugal joined the group. So each of these countries then takes this core SNOMED CT and enhances it to represent content that's specific to their country. So by that I mean in Denmark, the cardiologists took all the cardiology content and created Denmark-specific synonyms for the concepts, ways that they wanted to call certain diagnoses. There's different spelling variations in different countries, and just different ways of saying things. For example, in the United States, nurses use a term called post-mortem care when the patient expires, the things they do to finish that part of the patient's life cycle. And in the UK, they call that last offices. So there's a little bit different types of SNOMED content within each country, but it all relates to one core terminology. I think that we could go on to the next slide then.
Great, thank you. So the SNOMED CT language, this includes obviously a lot of different terminology. Give us a little breakdown.
Okay. I put the slide on here just to kind of give a sense of what SNOMED CT looks like in preparation for the next set of slides about really talking about how it's different from ICD. So if there's any coders in the audience, they're going to be pretty familiar with the number of concepts in ICD versus SNOMED. It's large. It's 300,000 concepts, and each of those concepts have a variety of synonyms. So when you start to look at synonyms and concepts, it gets even bigger. But I think for the purposes of today's conversation, we really want to talk about what does the U.S. market need to know about SNOMED in terms of being compliant with meaningful use, and to start to get their arms around getting some data analytics and some ideas about what the clinicians in their practices are using to represent what they do. So from a clinical findings and disorders perspective in SNOMED, there's about 65,000 concepts, and that's where you find diseases, signs and symptoms, those types of concepts, and then procedures are about 52,000. So those are the two sections of SNOMED that are really applicable to most of the meaningful use requirements, with the exception of microbiology for lab. And we get lots and lots of lab questions about what's my SNOMED responsibility for lab, so I did include a slide about that later. And we've got lots of veterinary content within SNOMED, because the veterinarians have used SNOMED to represent their practice for a long time. So either you're allergic to an animal, or there's actual procedures and diagnoses that are specific to the animal population. It's divided into 19 sections, so it's very well organized, so you can go and find what you want. But I think it makes sense now from a U.S. perspective to talk about the difference between ICD and SNOMED. We are very familiar from a U.S. perspective in terms of getting paid for what we do. So ICD is a billing classification in the United States. It's also used internationally for morbidity and mortality statistics. There is a U.S. modified version of ICD. It's the ICD-CM for diagnoses and PCS for procedures. We used to have folks from Health and Human Services on the SNOMED editorial board giving us lots of advice as we moved to SNOMED CT. And I remember back even as early as 2000, the representative from that agency was telling us that ICD-10 was coming within the next year. So it's been coming for a long time, and it's finally here. And I think it's important because meaningful use names SNOMED CT for a variety of things that we understand the difference between them. And I think one of the main differences that I'd like to talk about is this unspecified bullet at the bottom. So ICD is a classification system. It's a broad terminology and has broad categories that if you are not quite sure yet, your diagnosis is not confirmed, you have the ability with an ICD to say unspecified, other, those types of words. And from a SNOMED perspective, SNOMED doesn't look like that. It's very granular. It's very detailed. There is one concept in SNOMED that is kind of like not otherwise specified. It's one of my favorite SNOMED concepts, and it's called God Only Knows.
Right, I think I've seen that one, yes.
Yeah, it's GOK, and it's a subtype of undifferentiated illness or diagnosis, and it came from the UK. So you can imagine if in the US, a clinician here submitted that as their diagnosis for the patient, that probably wouldn't go over so well. Yeah. But I guess another way to talk about this is, you know, in ICD they might have a concept that says angioplasty, and in 9, that was fine, but in 10, they've added a variety of angioplasties with the body part, the approach, and the device. But I think it might make sense to continue to go through the slides. I wanted the audience to have some reference slides to show exactly a diagnosis and what it looks like in 9 and what it looks like in 10 and what SNOMED offers to the clinician. So I think we could go to the next slide.
Right. And ICD-10, obviously, as you just mentioned, has a lot more opportunity for highlighting or outlining detail as it relates to the diagnosis. Does that mean that it's aligning more closely with SNOMED's terminology?
Well, I think once we get to these examples, we can talk about that. But let me answer it this way. It's aligning with SNOMED in the fact that it's becoming more detailed and more specific. It's going in a little bit different direction than SNOMED, though, because it's adding body parts, reason for injury, you know, is it traumatic or not? It's offering approaches, specific devices. SNOMED CT is probably not going to get that granular in terms of all those different pieces of clinical documentation that you need for ICD-10. So we'll look at that as we go a little bit further here. But ICD-10 still offers that option of unspecified, not elsewhere classified, those types of things as more generic concepts that if you're not quite sure. And the use cases are really different. You know, the payers are focusing on ICD-10 because ICD-9 has been our ways of working in the United States. It'll be interesting to see once ICD-10 is up and running, and it's been about for, you know, many years, what the role of SNOMED CT will be in terms of more clinical representation. By that I mean, will we start to really ask for SNOMED CT for a lot of different pieces of nursing care plans and procedures and that kind of thing. So the slide that you have up is just a way of introducing to the audience the difference between a classification system and a terminology. So you can see that in ICD-9 and ICD-10, a bacterial pneumonia that's unspecified falls under a broad heading of diseases of the respiratory system. And in SNOMED, bacterial pneumonia does the same thing. But the beauty of SNOMED is that it also allows it to live in different sections or different hierarchies, not just to be within one classification system. So bacterial pneumonia in SNOMED lives in two places. It's a disorder of the respiratory system, and it's also an infectious disease. And so folks might say, well, so what? Why is that such a glorious, you know, advantage? Well, these multiple relationships and these multiple synonyms really provide you a better option in terms of data analytics. So you can create queries that are specific to certain sections of SNOMED or certain hierarchies, and this becomes more important as we talk about population health. So if you've collected bacterial pneumonia, per se, on a problem list, you can go back and start to look at it via show me all your respiratory diseases and show me all your infectious diseases by certain queries that you could write on your system. So I think we should just go ahead now and just really start to look about those differences. So I think it's important to provide the context of what ICD-9 looks like from a diagnosis perspective, and then the next slide we'll talk about ICD-10 so you can start to understand here why SNOMED was chosen as the clinical terminology for meaningful use for problem lists, transfers of care, quality measures, those types of things. So when we look at this one, it's a really busy slide, but I just wanted you to understand that if you're a neurologist practice, you're a rehab center, you're a physical therapist, and you're really interested in sharing specifics about the state of your patient's diagnosis, you can see where SNOMED CT gives you a lot more choices and a lot more specifics as opposed to just they don't have a normal gait in an ICD-9 perspective. So let's go to the next slide and see what this exact same example looks like with ICD-10. So here you can see ICD-10 has gone a little bit broader than ICD-9 in that it's talking about the abnormalities of gait and mobility. So it's adding another classification category here, whereas ICD-9 just had abnormalities of gait. But it also goes a little bit further and gets a little bit more detailed, but still not as detailed as SNOMED. So you can see here where ICD-10 has added this one type of abnormal walking patterns, ataxic gait, but it didn't add the other ones. And I'm guessing, and the coders could probably add more detail here, but that's because that's probably one of the most frequently billed or reported diagnoses. So that's how ICD-10 grew, by going back and looking to see what were we reporting all the time. And you can see here that when we got to this next section of SNOMED, ICD-10 did add one. But we still have within ICD-10 this difficulty in walking not elsewhere classified and other abnormalities of gait mobility. So when you use those types of concepts, you probably get paid, but it doesn't give you the specific details that you want to know, that clinicians want to know. And this becomes more important, too, now as we move into the era of patients having access to their records and patient portals and being able to go in and see their actual diagnoses and their problem lists and that kind of thing. So from that perspective, you can also see here that SNOMED CT codes look different than the codes for ICD. SNOMED CT codes don't have a meaning. They're randomly assigned. They're never reused. And ICD does have the capability to reuse their codes. It's rare, but it does sometimes happen. And you can see that SNOMED CT doesn't have not elsewhere classified, unspecified, etc. The broadest categories in SNOMED that you would find would be like this, finding of walking or finding of gait, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I do like to see that the ICD-10 seems to be increasing the alignment to a certain degree with the, I wonder if you have an opinion, maybe we address this later in the session, but given the fact that SNOMED really does clearly define and outline those components, those, those additional detailed components of each one of those diagnoses, why early on they hadn't decided, in the United States in particular, to align this more readily or more quickly?
That's a common question that I get all the time because I do speak a lot about SNOMED CT. But if you remember the timeline, SNOMED CT really started to be developed back in the early 2000s. And the ICD-10 train by then had already left the station. There's lots and lots of work being done on this, not just in the U.S., but throughout the world. And so we want to have that ability to continue practices that we'd already done. ICD-9 was really entrenched in terms of being a billing terminology here in the United States, and 10 was already on its way. So the piece that I can tell you about that is that ICD-11 at the WHO is now being created, and the ICD-11 team is made up of lots of terminology experts from the U.S. with deep SNOMED CT expertise. So I think that you're going to see that ICD-11 looks much more like SNOMED CT, and it'll be interesting to see how those two terminologies create relationships. But that's a long time out, but I think that's a quick way of saying that ICD-10 is here to stay. We still have all the functionality and infrastructure in place to use this as a billing terminology here in the United States. So it'll be interesting to see if some, maybe at some point in time, payers will start to ask for SNOMED CT as well. I haven't seen that yet.
Well, I can imagine from a payer standpoint that it would be helpful to have more detail, because obviously the more detail, the more likely they're going to get the right billing structure set up around it. But certainly it looks like, from this chart anyway, it looks like they're getting closer.
Well, and when you say the payers would like more detail, all the people in the room responsible for ICD-10 implementation are flopping on the floor right now, because the ICD-10 details that they have to have in terms of body site, approach, device used, traumatic versus spontaneous. Yeah. There's so much more clinical documentation information that you need to support the ICD-10 diagnosis. I think we just better change the subject.
I hear you. I know when we were building the bridge course that we have in our training program from ICD-9 to ICD-10, we had a lot of coders involved in that relationship, in that course development. And I agree that that was a lot of the sentiment from that group. So around the whole topic of meaningful use, what are those requirements as it relates to this particular terminology?
Sure. What's interesting about the terminologies for meaningful use is the recommendations and the requirements seem to be buried within the certification criteria. So you really have to go out and look for them. But folks have done that for you now, and we have all kinds of websites that have done that. But I put the resource on here in terms of the certification criteria document where you can go and really see where it's explained what SNOMED CT is required for. So here's just the basics. It's always been required for cancer registry reporting for years. That's not really new. The anatomic pathology community has used SNOMED CT for cancer registry reporting, and so that's not a new surprise. Most laboratory information systems can handle that without any problem. But these other areas here, I think I did have a slide come in about the lab, and I went ahead and took smoking status on the next slide and broke that out to show you a little bit more about what that looks like. But there are also, the ONC has standards and interoperability framework implementation guides, especially for the lab and others, where you can go and get more information about this.
Okay. as we go through, I just want to remind people, and we are starting to receive some questions. I just wanted to remind people that if you do have questions for Debra, type them into your chat box or into your question box, and we will try to have some time toward the end here to address some of those questions, or at the very least follow up with those questions after the event. So I just wanted to interrupt quickly because as we get into the more granular detail here, Debra, I imagine people will have some questions for you.
Sure, and I'm going to try not to focus too much on all of these choices, but I wanted just to show you that if SNOMED CT is required for smoking status, these are some of the choices that you have within SNOMED CT. Now, on a few slides up, I have listed a reference for you that will be helpful in terms of there are some value sets that folks have created for these. But you can see if you have to report on smoking status, for your institution, you can customize. Either your vendor's going to give you a starter set of the SNOMED CT codes for smoking status, or you have to create it yourself. Either way, you can customize it for the choices that your clinicians want to use within your institution. So it's if you're going to do pack per day, then you have to create a field for a number to be inserted. But from a SNOMED perspective, these are some of the choices that you have, and it would be great if we could just say yes or no. Do you smoke? Yes or no. But the meaningful use requirements are more specific. They want to know if it's every day, did you smoke before, did you never smoke, etc. Now, what's interesting about SNOMED CT is it also has content for pipe smoking, cigar smoking, chewing tobacco, that kind of thing. And what I found was interesting when I was preparing this presentation is I went to look to see what the marijuana smoking looked like in SNOMED. And in SNOMED, it's a disorder, and it's defined as an abuse concept, so it's cannabis abuse or whatever. So I'm really kind of curious to think about, now that we have Colorado and other states, if we're going to have to add content to SNOMED regarding smoking things that aren't tobacco. But for the meaningful use perspective here and what's required, this is just an example of the types of concepts that you find in SNOMED.
Well, that's actually a quick question that I had, which is looking at the level of detail here and the comment that you just made about sort of changing sociological items. Has SNOMED changed any time in the last several years in terms of some of this detail, or has it been fairly consistent?
Oh, no. It's a moving, living, breathing terminology. So SNOMED's released twice a year in January and July, and the National Library of Medicine here in the U.S. is responsible now for any U.S.-specific additions to SNOMED. But the core of SNOMED, back when the college was maintaining and releasing it, up until a year ago, I would say that each release SNOMED grew by about 2,000 to 3,000 concepts.
Wow.
And then I think the U.S. Extension of the U.S. release is probably adding to that probably another 500 to 1,000 concepts. So yes, it does grow, and as it grows, it also has concepts that are removed. So if there's a duplicate that's identified that's already there, they'll only keep one. If there's a concept that's no longer meaningful for healthcare, it will be removed, that kind of thing. So it has concepts that come and go, and they also bring SNOMED concepts out of retirement if they become meaningful again.
Relevant again. So in the case of the cannabis, my guess is that it will change designation. So it will,
sure,
will stay, but it will no longer be a disorder. It will be classified more similar to smoking.
Sure, unless it is an abuse situation.
Right.
So then we have those kinds of concepts in SNOMED for all types of drugs and that kind of thing. But there's a very organized mechanism for how to do this. There's a request submission format on the National Library of Medicine website, so you can request new content at any time. There's a big push on right now to enhance the organism content in SNOMED CT because it's required for labs, and so they're actually enhancing organisms as we speak to make sure that we have all the current organisms that have been identified.
Interesting. Most of the questions I'm going to hold to the end, but because we are on a slide that has a relevant question to this specific slide, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of the asterisks that are on the slide, is there a relevant explanation for those asterisks?
It's a code that has come from an extension.
Okay. So, meaning that obviously clearly the code number is much longer.
Yes, it's from the U.S. SNOMED, correct.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Okay, and you know, at the National Library of Medicine too, there's all kinds of browsers. So you can go, and they're all free, and you can go and download a browser to your desktop, and then you can type in the concept that you're looking for and that kind of thing. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about, you know, how does one get SNOMED CT, and what's my responsibility if my vendor provides it to me, that kind of thing. Okay. So I think we'll go through these just to talk about quality measures a little bit, because I think this is where people tend to get a little more befuddled. You know, smoking status is pretty straightforward. There's concepts there. You go and find the ones you like, and you use them. But I think it gets a little bit more interesting when we get into quality measure reporting.
Yeah, and I think CQMs are a big topic of curiosity and question and query to our website on a regular basis. So from the SNOMED CT side, what are those requirements for CQMs or the quality measure reporting?
Well, it's interesting, you know, that CMS is always changing too in terms of the numerators and denominators stories, in terms of what providers have to use to calculate their performance on their core and their menu set measures. And, you know, to the extent that they've eliminated the denominator calculation that's based on all patients with electronic health records in favor of a calculation that pertains to unique patients. And I think that's where SNOMED adds value and starts to help you do what you need to do from a numerator-denominator perspective. So this first slide just is an example of a statin prescribed at discharge. So the two concepts here that we need to think about are statins, acute MI, and this discharge piece. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. I've given the reference there as well for you on both slides. So this looks at how would SNOMED CT be applied to this quality measure in terms of what's your responsibility here. And you can see the QDM category in the middle, and you can see the SNOMED CT potential examples there. I think the important thing on this slide that I want to point out is that last website there. It's called the Value Sets for Eligible Hospitals. Mm-hmm. This is a great resource for folks. The National Library of Medicine has been charged and accepted the challenge to house these for folks. So what I mean by that is all quality measure developers, be it, you know, the AMA, the Joint Commission, you know, Quality Insights of Pennsylvania, whoever's creating these quality measures, they submit their quality measures to this value set group at the National Library of Medicine. By that I mean they actually decompose the quality measure into the structured data elements that are required for reporting, i.e. these data elements up here. They submit the name of the data element and the associated code that goes along with that. So if it's a SNOMED CT appropriate data element, they'll give the SNOMED CT name, the SNOMED CT code. If it's LOINC, they'll give the LOINC long name, the LOINC code, RX norm, et cetera. So it's a really good place to go to look at pre-coded data elements per quality measure to give you a sense of whether or not what you're planning to do jives with that, or if you're buying mappings or your quality measure vendor that you're choosing is offering you pre-mapped content, there's a place where you can go and look at that. So, I mean, you're still responsible to validate what you're sending, but this is a source where you can go to look to see what the actual measure developers have suggested as the code.
That is a good resource. Yeah, that's a great resource.
It's great. We took the database there and we filtered and played with it so that when we went to our clients, we'd be able to show it to them in a filtered view. And so we could say, all right, for a stroke quality measure from this organization versus a stroke quality measure from that organization, these are how the data elements are similar or different. These are how the codes are similar and different. So to have people start to think about what their responsibility is there. But it's a terrific resource.
Well, that's great, and it sounds like you've sort of peppered through the presentation, or it looks like you've linked to the most recent content references as well throughout most of this presentation. So this will be a good referral source for people.
Right, and I tried to make it fairly simple so that if you had to go out and explain it to somebody else about why should I care about SNOMED CT, that you'd have at least a little bit of ammunition from that perspective.
Right, exactly. Very, very helpful. Thank you. Now, you had mentioned before about the lab requirements and that people are more
Sure.
familiar with this area. How is this, aligning with the SNOMED CT codes, the lab requirements?
What I think is interesting is that we have historically offered a free SNOMED Basics class every month at the college, and when I go out and offer Intro to SNOMED for provider organizations, the most common question that's asked immediately is, so what is the lab supposed to do? The lab's a little bit different because it has its own laboratory information system. It has its own data dictionary, that kind of thing. So the resources that are responsible for terminology in the lab are a little bit different than the EHR terminology resources. But from a meaningful use perspective, laboratory information systems now are required to have functionality to be certified so that they must be able to accommodate a LOINC code for structured laboratory results and a SNOMED CT code for a variety of use cases. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Stage 1 meaningful use had electronic lab reporting to public health as a menu item, affectionately called ELR. So what the new meaningful use rules are is that when you have to report to your local or state public health jurisdiction, you no longer can pick up the phone and call in hepatitis or fax in a salmonella, that kind of thing. It has to be part of your laboratory workflow. It has to be part of an HL7 2.5.1 message, and the public health then consumes it. It's very interesting in the fact that public health is ready in most states and it is doing this. So when you talk about what your lab needs to do for SNOMED and for LOINC, it's often easier just to bite off a small piece of this in terms of your public health reportables. It's usually about 250 to 300 for each state, and it depends upon where you live. But basically, I think the easiest way to think about this is that LOINC is the question and SNOMED is the answer. So by that I mean if you're sending a positive stool culture or a positive HIV screen, there's a LOINC code for that. But then if you want to say Salmonella, Shigella, or what organism you identified, that's a SNOMED CT code. When you want to say positive, negative, detected, not detected for your immunology type results, that's the SNOMED CT code. So it's pretty straightforward. What's made this a little bit more exciting now is that they have added specimens to this ELR requirement. So some public health departments are asking for specimen types. I mean, was it stool, saliva, serum, et cetera? So it's fairly straightforward. It's LOINC for the name of the test or the result, and then SNOMED is the answer for the microorganism or the yes-no. Now, if you do that for electronic lab reporting, it gets you in good shape for the fact that Stage 2 and then Stage 3 is going to require that you do this for all of your structured laboratory results, not just your public health reportables. So there's labs on quality measures, there's labs on transfer of care, and there's labs that just get set back and forth across systems. So from that perspective, SNOMED CT is really not too frightening. It's just another field and another choice. But the laboratorians have to make that choice because they're doing the test, so they know what the result is. It's not something that you can pre-program.
Right, and you know, as you mentioned earlier, I think when you say it's not that frightening, I think as you commented, the fact that all of the areas of terminology and coding and the levels of reporting are changing in pretty dramatic ways in our current healthcare culture. I think anytime you can reflect on an item that isn't quite as dramatic in terms of its change or in terms of its complexity, it's probably helpful to know that.
Sure.
So in the SNOMED terminology universe, who's involved?
Okay, great. I think now this is where we're going to talk about what should I do about all this, right? So from that perspective, the stakeholders are really everybody, but for a variety of different reasons. So, health information exchanges, they certainly are consuming and sending terminology and coded data. They're not the judge of those codes. By what I mean is they send codes that are offered to them. I do know some health information exchanges who offered to code all lab results for clients, that kind of thing. That just gets really hard to scale after a while. To have somebody offer to code all your data for you as it comes to an exchange gets to be a little bit overwhelming, and I think from a U.S. perspective now, the health information exchanges just have the capability to send coded message from that perspective. I mean, they certainly don't have the capability to harmonize. If I send them X and you send them Y, is that the same or different, and what should I send? That kind of thing. So we've talked about public health. We've talked about CMS. You know, all government agencies are certainly focused on clinical data and billing data and the relationship between the two. I think the one thing to focus on here is the vendor story. So if you're a provider and you're on an implementation team in your hospital, or you're responsible for the problem list in your ambulatory practice, the most common thing I hear is that I really don't have to worry about this because my vendor gave me all the mappings I need, or I bought my mappings from this vendor, that kind of thing. So in terms of talking about that, vendors are offering problem lists that have the term and the problem list mapped to ICD and SNOMED, and then folks are buying content as well to supplement their EHR implementation. So by that I mean you're maybe buying your evidence-based practice order sets from one vendor. You might be, or your quality measures vendor might be offering you some mappings. You might have mappings at the point of care for problem list, care planning, et cetera, from an ambulatory vendor or an EHR vendor. So from that perspective, you're getting lots and lots of content from lots and lots of different places that does come pre-mapped. So what the heck do you do about that? I think the main take-home message is that you can't assume that it's all the same and that it's all exactly the way that you would hope for it to be. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what does that look like then once you decide, okay, I need to get my arms around this terminology story, and I need to start to put some things in place to handle this, because everybody wants it, and everybody wants it in a certain way.
And so, you know, that has been a common thread along the lines of the coding experience, particularly in the medical community for ICD. So clearly it's also applicable to the SNOMED terminology. But, you know, there's I think a common misconception that vendors are going to take care of it all for you. And so what you're saying is the vendors are potentially supplying some of the matrices and the mapping, but you know, how does that relate to what the responsibilities are of the providers and the billers and coders themselves? Deborah?
Oh, are you there?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's use the last slide as a way to frame the conversation about what should I do about all this. You know, we've talked a lot today, so let's go on to the next slide about terminology management. Okay, so we often use the expression that terminology, when you have good structured data, good information strategy around all of your data, terminology is fairly easy. It's, you know, the dessert of the 9-course meal. But backing up to figure out really what are my practices around clean, structured data. For example, do I know where I have built and I report on X, for example, a stroke or BMI or whatever? Are the names the same across my institution, whether I built it myself in my EHR, whether I bought it from a knowledge vendor, whether I bought it from somebody who's just sold me mappings, that kind of thing? Where throughout my institution do I have instances of this data element? And where those instances are, who owns that data element and uses it for what reasons? So this starts to get you into the mindset of creating and building that common truth and those processes around who's in charge, where's the central responsibility, is it my clinical informatics team, is it my IT build team? You know, how do these terms that I'm interested fit into my overall data strategy? You know, from documentation to the data warehouse to sending this data element out the door. So we really look at that in terms of a functional view of governance, it's really not much different than the governance that you create around your information priorities and high-level practices. You know, who oversees and monitors all those types of practices from the enterprise perspective in terms of the information policies, the rules, and the standards. So terminology is just one piece of that. You know, you have data stewards responsible for your data management. You have data stewards responsible for your data quality. You have data managers responsible for your database administration, your data integration, your interfaces, your quality monitoring. So I think terminology is just another piece of that. It's recognizing early on that someone has to be in charge. Someone has to manage and communicate change requests. So for that, I mean, I want to add a new concept to my data dictionary. Oh, is it already there? What's it called? What's the code for it? I just bought an evidence-based practice guideline for that same data element. Is the map that I received from that vendor the same as the map that I have? Those types of best practices and starting to document those and communicate those, I think, are important. So I think we're probably going to have a lot of questions about that, but I just wanted to stress that the data governance around terminology is similar to the data governance that you do around your information, but it has a little bit more specificity in terms of the global view across the organization. Some folks will just start by looking at that top 1,000 list of my most frequently billed diagnoses, my most frequently reported findings, quality measures, public health reportables, and just get their arms around that small subset of their data that they can start to lock down and own and pay attention to.
Well, we do have some questions. Thank you, Deborah. That, you know, I think that taking what is essentially a fairly complex concept for a lot of our medical community audience, and my guess is that we've got quite a few consultants and coders involved here today as well, that, you know, taking that concept and breaking it down like that to make it a little bit more digestible was very, very helpful, certainly for me. We do have a few questions that I would like to address, and we will take a little time to do that. But then, you know, feel free to expound on any of that as we roll. We have, you know, probably another 10 minutes or so. And then if we don't get to your question, we will certainly address it. I will shoot them over to Deborah, and we'll get that information back to you after the session. One of the questions is regarding the LOINC. Are the LOINC codes compatible, indexed, or mapped into the HIEs, the state health departments, the CDC? Do you have the answer to that?
Sure. Let me start from the beginning. So LOINC is a terminology that was created by Regan Streif in Indianapolis, and it is the standard for laboratory orders and for results. So it is when you create an HL7 message to send a coded data element, for example, a hematocrit or hemoglobin or whatever, say you're a hospital lab and you're sending that result to an ambulatory provider in an electronic message. There's a field in that message for the LOINC code and a field in that message for the name of the result. So from an HIE perspective, the HIE is really the conduit or the hub to send that on. I think I might have muddied the water a little bit when I talked about the fact that early on with HIEs, they offered to put the LOINC code on the result for the clients. And that just became large and unwielding, because you can imagine if you're sending thousands of lab results across your HIE every day, there's really no auto mapping or magic bullet that could do that for you. So from an HIE perspective, they have the capability to send and receive across their platform a LOINC encoded message. The CDC has long been an advocate of LOINC, and that's very obvious in the ELR meaningful use requirement for public health entities to accept LOINC and SNOMED for all public health reportables. It gives the CDC a much better avenue to do those large-based, population-based data analytics, you know, based on codified terminology rather than just words from that perspective. So I hope I answered that. LOINC is going to be around as the standard for orders and results for a long time.
Thank you. No, I think that was very clarifying. From the same question bank, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm letting you answer
Oh,
it.
good.
Yes. Will practices be required to implement ICD-10 prior to ICD-11?
Oh, sure. ICD-11, that's just starting. And like I said, they've been telling me that ICD-10 was coming since 2000,
Right.
coming any minute. So, and then you have to remember that we do the U.S. modifications to ICD. We make it more billing friendly. So the ICD-11 that's being created now by the WHO is more of a classic ICD-11 to be used around the world in terms of morbidity and mortality statistical reporting. So once we get our hands on ICD-11, it's going to be years and years and years. I think we should just put our heads down and know that ICD-10 is here to stay, and we're all just going to have to get used to how we document to support what codes we choose.
Right, and the reason I laughed at that is because when we rolled out our ICD-10 training, our bridge training, we got a ton of questions during that announcement period from people saying, but ICD-11 is coming. Why, why should we learn in between? So, fortunately or unfortunately, that transition, as you mentioned, is still happening, and there will be a really high level of requirement to make sure you get that ICD-10 training first. Another question, interesting. A group saying that they need to educate themselves on SNOMED so they know which codes to apply to the ancillary procedures. For example, dietitian consults with different reasons. Would you have some recommendations where they could go to get that kind of training and understanding of SNOMED?
Well, now, if it's a question just specifically about nutritional content and dietetic content, the American Association of Dietitians, and I'm going to get that wrong, it's either ADA or the Professional Society for Dietitians. I've spoken to them over the years and given them education, and they have their own dietetic data set or their nutritional data set. But they have a locally developed terminology for nutrition that they have mapped to SNOMED CT, and that's available through their organization. And you can email me offline. I think my email's on the next slide, and I can give you the person at that organization. And I can also give you some ideas about who offers SNOMED CT education from that perspective. There's the College of American Pathologists Consulting Division does. I know the National Library of Medicine does, and there's lots of good primers out there as well.
Thank you for that. I did put the following slide up so that we can that folks can take down your email address. That said, everybody will get a copy or a link to this slide deck in addition to the recorded session, so you will have access to that information. Another question, while we still have a little bit of time, regarding terms and terminology. Someone is asking that it's true, or they feel that it's true that will be different as it relates to different types of hospitals and practices, and where they can find the standards. I think you've just answered that to a certain degree, but where can they access those standards?
Well, if the question is about naming conventions and what should I name something in my institution, that's getting into, how do I make a custom build for my EHR, that kind of thing. My clinicians like to call cataracts cats, that kind of thing. So regardless of what you use as the term at the point of care, what it's mapped to behind the scenes from a SNOMED perspective, you're going to have interoperability across systems and across naming conventions. But if you're looking for a best practices in terms of what should I name something, I think a good place to start is with what do you have to report for what reasons. And there's references for that. So for example, if you've got order sets that you're buying from a vendor and they decompose their data elements and provide maps to you, you can look at the naming conventions within the order sets and see if you like them, yes or no, and how they compare to what you currently use within your care plans or your hospital or your ambulatory environment. And then you can also compare that to those quality measure value sets to see. But I think across the board, that top 1,000 things that you should really pay attention to and worry about are pretty common naming conventions from a disease and disorder perspective. I think it gets more interesting as we get more sophisticated with our electronic health record systems and with people understanding SNOMED. You know, I can see a time where eventually for diabetics we're going to have to report not just on whether or not they had a foot exam, but can a brand new diabetic, you know, demonstrate that they can give their own insulin? Can they demonstrate that they know the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia? And there's SNOMED codes for that. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think I've answered the question in terms of is there one place where you can go to find out what everybody calls X? I'm not aware of that.
Well, I appreciate that, and of course, the more, you know, a lot of the reason that we mount topics like this, particularly topics that have a focused, identified audience, is to figure out what kinds of training requirements our audience is looking for. So, you know, understanding that SNOMED clearly has relevance to the meaningful use processes. We are launching a meaningful use level 2 course for attestation purposes and sort of a deeper dive on that this year, and so understanding that people would like some additional information about SNOMED, we certainly will investigate, including more information and more resources and references to it from that secondary level course. One last question, Deborah. We have more, but I'm gonna pull the one I think is probably on many people's minds, and then we'll address the others in follow-up. Somebody's asking. You were talking about vendors earlier. If we're in the process of selecting a new EHR vendor to attest for meaningful use 2, what do you have any suggestions regarding any discussions they should have or questions they should ask with that vendor about SNOMED CT?
Well, I think it all goes back to if they're certified. So if they're certified, then that means that they've met the minimum requirements to be able to support terminology. By that, I mean in a problem list they can house 1 or 2 SNOMED codes, and in other areas, quality measures and those types of places within assessments, they can support putting a SNOMED code there. So the question is, whose responsibility is that? Does the vendor offer a pre-SNOMED encoded problem list for you to use? Do they recommend that you go to a knowledge vendor who offers problem list content with mappings? You know, I think it's an area to be explored in terms of if I buy it off the shelf, what's my responsibility? What do you give me already that has codes attached to it, and what's my responsibility? But I hope that from this hour, folks have started to think about the fact that you're going to be getting codes from multiple places, and someone back home has to be in charge of are they the same or are they different, and which one is best for my use case.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Deborah, for joining us for today's Learning Lunch. Incredibly informative session, very, very helpful. I think we may want to bring you back to unclutter more of our terminology maze as it relates to this very soon. I would also like to thank everyone who attended today. Remember that anyone who registered for today's event will receive an email with links to both the recorded and PDF versions of the session. As you may know from attending our webinars in the past, Format Approved offers online self-paced education on topics relating to meaningful use, ICD-10, PQRS, all kinds of regulatory and reporting topics. So please visit our website at formatapproved.com and click on Curriculum to learn more about that, or click on our Learning Lunch link on the homepage to register for updates on future free webinar events that we run on a regular basis. Our next Learning Lunch will air on February 18th as part of the Meaningful Use Minute series on MU Stage 2 in 2014, the year of many changes. Keep an eye on your email box and on our homepage for other upcoming topics. And thank you again for joining us today. Thanks a lot, Deborah. Very much appreciate your time today.
Sure, and just send me the questions that we didn't get to, and I'll do those individually.
Absolutely. And for those of you who have a direct question, Deborah's email is on the screen here, and I'm sure she'd be happy to respond as well. We look forward to having you on our next Learning Lunch. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a great day.